a little bit of history repeating.
In today's society, to be considered a sovereign or free state, there are a few elements or criteria that a state should meet, such as recognized international borders or membership to the United Nations. Often, we use certain social and economic tools to determine the success of a state, such as how much money the average house makes, to how long people live, to the infant mortality rate. Now, during the 19th century, the most advanced and industrialized countries in Europe were Great Britain, France, and Germany, and they wanted to increase their land in resources in order to increase their power. This led to the creation of huge empires where these countries dominated the territories of other countries that they took control of, both militarily and politically. And in this video, we'll be looking specifically at how they dominated and colonized Africa. Politically, European countries wanted to increase their sphere of influence, that is, the amount of people that their country had influence on, as well as expand their ability to produce goods. Controlling other countries also gave the mother country a sense of power. Part of the reason for colonization was territory. The more land you had, the more you could exploit that land for wealth, which would ultimately lead to power in Europe. From a social point of view, colonies provided Europe with a place to dump their excess population by encouraging the poorest people to up and move far away from the mother country. Before, we saw colonies of exploitation, whose sole purpose was to export raw materials to the mother country. Now we start to see colonies of settlement. In the 19th century, almost 50 million people left the poorest regions of Europe to start new lives in Australia and Canada for English immigrants, and Algeria for the French. From an economic point of view, most of the world's manufacturing took place in Europe by 1850. They had the means to export the products that they made. However, they still needed raw materials for their goods, markets or places that they could sell these goods, and new companies to invest their money in. Products were traded between the mother country and the colony. Now, we saw many times already in this course the idea of mercantilism. Well, in a lot of ways, this continued. We would have the colony sending raw materials to the mother country, who in turn would make finished products to be sold both domestically and to the colony. Now, Africa had a ton of natural resources, from gold, diamonds, and copper to ivory, rubber, and wood. The climate in Africa was perfect for growing coffee, cotton, sugarcane, peanuts, pepper, and other spices. Europeans controlled part of the coast of Africa because of the slave trade. Now they started to go to the interior of the continent to exploit the resources without the consent of the people of Africa. The Africans really had no weapons that can match the Europeans and couldn't resist the power of the colonizers. The problem was England, France, Germany, and other countries all had some sort of claim to Africa, but they needed a way to divide it up without going to war with one another. Now, German Chancellor Otto von Bismarck organized the Berlin Conference in 1884. It was during that conference that countries came to agreement that said everyone must practice free trade in Africa, and also that everyone should use the Congo and Niger River for shipping. Slavery and slave trading, as well as importing weapons into Africa, was prohibited. And to take possession of a region, a colonizing country had to establish a permanent presence there. By the end of the conference, the Europeans carved Africa into about 50 countries without actually consulting the people of Africa. This had profound consequences on the continent, such as the way the colonizers made the borders didn't correspond with the ethnic boundaries of the people of Africa. This led to an increase in tension between different ethnic groups within the continent. Imperialism is when a country or state spreads its rule over other countries. Colonization had some pretty profound impact on the people of Africa. By creating the colonies, Europeans began to occupy land and impose their way of life onto these people. They essentially tried to assimilate people into their own culture. During the French Revolution and the English Enlightenment, we saw people calling for equal rights. So how did the Europeans justify dominating the people of Africa? Well, the Europeans were convinced that the people in these territories were inferior to them because their technology and weapons were not as advanced as theirs. They also felt that their religion was not as advanced, so they brought missionaries to help the people of Africa. They felt that by colonizing the lands of Africa, that they were civilizing the people. This led to discrimination against the people of Africa. Economically, entrepreneurs saw Africa as a place to make money. They built transportation infrastructure, such as roads, canals, and railways, as well as mines to extract the natural resources of Africa. One example of this infrastructure is the Suez Canal, which opened in 1869 and connected Europe with Asia. It was a 160-kilometer long canal, and it made it possible for European ships to sail to Asia without having to go all the way around Africa. Africans were hired or forced to work in terrible conditions in mines so that Europeans could get raw materials at a low cost. Now, you could make the argument that they basically industrialized Africa for their own benefit, but the Europeans didn't build factories or foundries in the colonies. By doing this, they made sure that Africans could not get manufacturing jobs, which would be reserved for Europeans in the mother countries. Mercantilism continued, and under the system of only being able to trade with the mother country, Europeans gained control of world trade. The colonies were forced to buy European goods instead of making their own. The Africans did not benefit from the system. Instead, all of the wealth went to the European countries. The British colonization of Africa is a prime example of indirect rule. African leaders were chosen by the British colonial authorities from the local elites, that is, the highest ranking members of society, and they were allowed to keep some of their authority over their people and way of life. The British merchants and administrators who made their homes, albeit temporarily, in the colony, did not mix with the population, but rather ruled through these African elites. France worked differently than Britain to exert their influence in the colony. France wanted to assimilate the people of Africa into their own culture. They did this mainly through education. In the French colonies, Africans were introduced to Western ideas of language, religion, laws, and customs. If you could learn French well enough, you could work as an official in the colony, and in some cases, members of the African elite participated in France's political life. But this did not extend to all people. Some did not want to abandon their culture and did not trust the colonizers. Now, I don't want you guys to think that the people of Africa just gave up. Despite the power of the European countries, they did resist. Samori Touré was a Sudanese ruler who fought the French for almost 20 years, but eventually the French were helped by rival African chieftains to capture Touré. But if you want to see successful resistance, you need only look at Ethiopia's Menelik II, who defeated the Italians in battle and secured independence not only for his country, but he developed an empire of his own. But by the end of the 20th century, protests and uprising were not enough to stop the power of the colonizers. By 1914, the industrial powers of France, Britain, Germany, and Spain had transformed Africa and ruled over the continent. Imperialism had a profound effect on the people of Africa. Economically, when countries in Africa gained their independence in the mid-20th century, there was no manufacturing industry in place. And the countries in Africa are still feeling the effects of this form of economic discrimination, and is now classified as a developing country. Culturally, Africans were led to adopt aspects of European culture, such as learning about Christianity from missionaries, to going to schools built and run by Europeans, and learning about European way of life. When we look at the impact on the people, the colonization of Africa led to a large number of Africans dying. People who tried to resist were killed and others died because of forced labor or punishments. Laws were passed that discriminated against the people of Africa, and in places like the Congo, blacks and whites couldn't even live in the same neighborhood. So that's where we'll stop. I hope you guys found this video helpful, and I'll see you next time.